Jim Harbaugh is one of those people that he leaves things in a better place than what he found it. When he first got hired by Stanford, they went from being irrelevant bottom feeders on the West Coast who people only known for academics to being a powerhouse on the West Coast. And then he leaves and David Shaw takes over, who was his assistant coach on the staff. I believe he was his OC. David Shaw takes what Jim Harbaugh built up at Stanford when he left for the 49ers and continued to make sure that Stanford was one of the best teams, not just in the Pac-12, but in that area of the country in college football. Jim Harbaugh, what makes him such a great coach isn't just because he is really good at making sure that he has a disciplined and physical team, but also because he's a great CEO head coach. And being a great CEO head coach means that you always make great hires when it comes to your coaching staff. And with Sherrone Moore being named the new head coach of Michigan football, Michigan is perfectly aligned to maintain their dominance in the Big Ten. There's not going to be too many players that are going to transfer away from Michigan with Sherrone Moore being promoted the full-time head coach, because all of these players probably had some sort of connection to Sherrone Moore before they even arrived to Michigan. So it's not like you're getting a head coach who you know nothing about. Sherrone Moore already said in his press conference that he's not going to change too much philosophy-wise with how this program's run and their style of play. They're still going to be a smash-mouth physical football team, but he possibly could make Michigan football better than what it was under Jim Harbaugh. I know that's a crazy concept to think about, but remember when Urban Meyer stepped down and he handed the keys off to Ryan Day? Well, the recruiting at Ohio State has been better under Ryan Day than what it was under Urban Meyer. Now, Ohio State may be lacking in certain areas under Ryan Day now than what they were with Urban Meyer, but you can get a head coach who can sit behind a guy like Jim Harbaugh, get groomed to become the successor, and potentially the guy who becomes the successor could potentially exceed the master. Michigan hasn't recruited at a consistently elite level. At least not at the top 10, top 8, top 7 level consistently. Sherrone Moore, he could be somebody who could take Michigan's recruiting to a level that we've never seen before. Because you got to remember that the last 2-3 off seasons, when it came to National Signing Day, these recruits didn't know if Jim Harbaugh was still going to be with the team when they committed or if he was going to be jumping for the NFL. Now that you have a head coach that you know is going to be there and he's not going anywhere, and he's not going to leave for anywhere, it should make recruiting a lot easier, because now you don't have to reassure these recruits that, oh yeah, I'm going to be here. Like, you're Sherrone Moore, I'm going to be here. I'm not going to the NFL. I'm not leaving for another job. So it gives these commits less things that they have to think about in terms of if their head coach is going to be committed to not just them, but to staying with the program, not jumping for what they perceive to be a better job. And two, you know, Jim Harbaugh is a great CEO head coach and he's a pretty good recruiter. But what makes Jim Harbaugh such a great coach is he's a better talent developer than he is a recruiter. You see, Michigan has always recruited at a pretty decent level, even prior to Jim Harbaugh getting there. The problem is that they weren't able to take the guys that they got and turn them into high NFL draft picks like Jim Harbaugh has done. Sherrone Moore, he should be pretty good at developing these players, because the staff is probably going to have some small changes. I'm not expecting Sherrone Moore to have to hire an entirely new staff. There are going to be guys who follow Jim Harbaugh to the NFL. I believe defensive coordinator Jesse Minter is most likely going to be his defensive coordinator for the Chargers, because Jesse Minter is an NFL guy. But all the other coaches, I think, have a good chance of staying. And even then, Sherrone Moore, since he was groomed by Jim Harbaugh, if he's anything like what David Shaw was at Stanford, he should know what he wants in his assistant coaches. He should know what he wants out of his offensive coordinator. And these players, they've played at a high level under Sherrone Moore. All right, yeah, he was an interim head coach and it wasn't fully his team, but I don't have no questions about how prepared this program is going to be in big games under Sherrone Moore. They won their biggest games of the season against their rival Ohio State. They beat Penn State. They won a tough road game against Maryland without Jim Harbaugh being on the sideline with Sherrone Moore. Sherrone Moore, he was responsible for making sure that the team's morale stayed up, and they rallied behind Sherrone Moore as the head coach. You know, there was a lot of emotion that came out of Sherrone Moore when they got that win over Penn State, when they ran the ball a million bajillion times straight to end that game. That's a mindset. That's a mentality. And the mentality that Jim Harbaugh has instilled in Michigan is still going to be carried on and so forth by Sherrone Moore. He's everything that Jim Harbaugh was, although a little bit different in certain areas. You know, Jim Harbaugh had a really unique personality. He wasn't for everybody. And sometimes he could be one of those coaches that you either love him or you hate him. But Sherrone Moore seems like a pretty universally liked guy by everybody. And now you got the NCAA, who probably is going to put a couple of penalties on you, but I don't think it should be anything that should be anything remotely close to what we saw when the NCAA really put their hammer down back in the early days of college football with SMU and everything that they had going on. So regardless of the penalties that Michigan gets dished out by the NCAA, I believe Sherrone Moore is going to be able to overcome them, just because this team bought into him when he was the interim head coach. They could have made Jesse Minter the interim head coach. And the fact that he went 3-0 against some of the biggest programs, not just in the Big Ten, but in college football. Penn State was a top 10 team this year. Same thing with Ohio State. And he beat those squads being the head coach on the sidelines. Now, it's a lot different when you're not going to have Jim Harbaugh around and you got to come up with the game plan by yourself, and you're going to have to run the practice and manage the players and all that. But I don't think it's going to be nothing that Sherrone Moore isn't going to be able to handle. Is there a lot of pressure on him to maintain what Jim Harbaugh built? Yes, there is. But if David Shaw was able to maintain Stanford for a couple of years after Jim Harbaugh left, there's no reason why Sherrone Moore shouldn't be able to do the same at Michigan. Jim Harbaugh has a really good eye for hiring good assistant coaches. And Sherrone Moore, if he wasn't going to be the head coach at Michigan, he definitely was going to be the head coach somewhere else at a big-time program, and it was going to be Power 5, and there wasn't too many candidates out there that you could have said would have been a better fit than what Sherrone Moore already is with Michigan. He already knows the program. There already is a culture set in place that he is going to continue to carry on and run. But Michigan, I don't expect them to fall off with Sherrone Moore replacing Jim Harbaugh. Post Jim Harbaugh, Michigan, I'm expecting it to be better than what it was during the Harbaugh era. Because the Harbaugh era was never about, bringing in the most talented players. It was all about, for the first couple of years, trying to find an identity. You remember when Jim Harbaugh went with the old smash mouth way of offense, and then he couldn't get the defense right. And then when he finally got the right defense, he had to figure out the right offense to run. He went between the spread offense with Shea Patterson to going back to the basics and getting back to what worked, getting back to what was Michigan football, and that's being physical, being stout up front. And Sherrone Moore, being like an offensive line coach or specializing in that particular area, Michigan should still be a tough football team, and they really should still have some of the better offensive lines in college football under him. And if you can win up front, which is what you got to be able to do to win consistently in the Big Ten, then you should still be able to have success. Now, when it comes to skill position, he's going to have to improve that area, but with recruiting improving, with Sherrone Moore being the head coach, knowing that you're going to have stability there, knowing that if you're a recruit and you go to Michigan and you plan on honoring your 3-4 years there, you know that Sherrone Moore is going to be along with you on the journey. And you don't have to worry about him flirting with the NFL every offseason. I know that had to put a damper on what Michigan wanted to do recruiting-wise. I don't even know how they were even able to consistently bring in top 25 classes when every offseason Jim Harbaugh's future was always up in the air. The difference between Ohio State and Michigan is talent. But when it comes to philosophy, when it comes to the culture that Michigan has built, that hasn't changed. And this is the same head coach that beat Ryan Day last year on the sideline. So why can't he continue the streak? I wouldn't be surprised if we see Michigan continue to dominate Ryan Day and Ohio State's Buckeyes for at least another 2-3 seasons, because Ohio State just doesn't have the toughness that Michigan has. You know, the thing with Ryan Day and Ohio State is that they just don't have enough juice. They're not amped up anytime they play Michigan. Michigan, when you play this team, not only are you about to play in a 60-minute football game, but you're about to go to war. You're about to go to battle. This team is about to bruise, batter you, beat you to a pulp. They're trying to play bully ball, and Ohio State just doesn't have that mentality that they're ready to handle, or they know how to beat a team that just wants to bully them around. You know, Ohio State has always been more of a finesse team to me than they are a physical team to me. And that's why Sherrone Moore, remaining the head coach at Michigan, I believe that there are a lot of traditions that he's going to continue to carry on, and there are certain things that he's going to make better with the program, such as recruiting. So I'm really high on what post-Harbaugh Michigan looks like with Sherrone Moore being the full-time head coach. Now, the last thing I want to talk about